Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The abrupt end of the U.S. Ukraine mineral agreement on February 28th led to a significant reduction in American support, including arms, intelligence, and satellite imagery to Ukraine. Now, in the wake of this decision, Russia has intensified its offensive, while diplomatic efforts between Ukraine, the U.S., and other global players remain in flux. With key meetings and negotiations on the horizon, including a high-level U.S. Ukraine meeting in Saudi and potential U.S. Russia talks in Türkiye, the trajectory of the war appears increasingly uncertain. Additionally, internal political maneuvers such as reports of Trump allies engaging with Ukrainian opposition leaders and growing European support for Kyiv further complicate the diplomatic landscape. So against this backdrop, we turn to experts to analyze the current state of the war and the broader impact on global diplomacy. For this, we invite Choi Hyun-jin, Associate Professor of Political Science at Kyung-hee University. Welcome, Professor.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And also joining us is Christophe Goudang, Professor of Political Science at Kookmin University. Great to have you again, Professor.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
So let's start with Professor Che. So after the U.S.-Ukraine mineral agreement fallout in February 28, the U.S. has temporarily stopped not only arms and intelligence support, but also satellite imagery access for Ukraine. So with such a sudden cutoff, what is the current situation in Ukraine now?
Yes, as you said, since the United States has stopped some military and intelligence support to Ukraine, Ukraine has been in a much weaker position. The biggest problem is the loss of real-time intelligence and also satellite images, which has been very useful to Ukraine in monitoring and stopping Russian missile and drone attack. And as a result, Russia has increased its attack recently. So Russian forces have launched more heavy missile and drone strike in key cities like Donetsk and killing many Ukrainian civilians. The Ukraine air defense system is very struggling nowadays because they depend on U.S. intelligence support to detect and stop this kind of attacks from Russia. And at the same time, the Russian troops have made gains on the battlefield. In the Kursk region, for example, which Ukraine has taken last year, the Russian forces have regained about 2/3 of the lost territory. And if this continues, Ukraine could lose more strategic position, making it harder to negotiate with Russia in future peace talk. And at the same time, politically, this situation is putting a lot of pressure on President Zelensky as well. With no U.S. support and Europe unable to fully replace the United States, Ukraine has now few options on the table. And if this is true, the future peace talk may favor Russia rather than Ukraine. And in general, this war is at a critical turning point now. Without renewed U.S. some military support, Ukraine's ability to defend itself and negotiate with Russia will encounter serious challenges.
Right, so it seems like Kyiv is facing increasing pressure on the battlefield and also in terms of diplomacy. Now to Professor Goudang. So after the U.S. suspended its support for Ukraine, Russia, like Professor Che said, has intensified its indiscriminate bombings. And President Trump has mentioned that the U.S. is considering sanctions on Russia, but still kind of expressed trust in President Putin as well. Do you think Russia will continue its attacks with Trump's pro-Russian stance, and how do you think the war would unfold?
Well, in fact, the answer is in the question. It is an empty threat, and it is an empty threat in the most literal sense of the term because it is not substantiated in any way. Look at the way Trump negotiates with his allies. In the case of Ukraine, as Professor Che just explained, America withdrew most of their support almost overnight. When it comes to Europe, when it comes to China, when it comes to Canada, Trump knows only one language, the language of coercion, the language of force. it's all about tariffs. And tariffs, in this case, have a number, they have a date. So they're all very concrete. When Trump says he's to retaliate against Russia, it's very interesting to say that there is no concrete substantiation of this menace. What I think is that apparently what Trump has decided is that now Russia and America are to somehow share the remains of Ukraine, with Russia stealing some of Ukrainian territories, namely the Crimea and the territories Russia has already invaded in the east of Ukraine, in Donbass, and maybe a few more that we cannot tell, while America is apparently to somehow refund itself for its support with rare earth elements and other natural resources that America is trying to steal from Ukraine now. When Trump ambushed, when Trump humiliated Zelensky a couple of weeks ago, he told him, "You don't have the cards." So that's very interesting because the language here, "you don't have the cards," is not the language of an ally. It's the language of best case scenario, a poker player, worst case scenario, a mafia boss. But there is nothing about democracy. There is no selfless help to expect from Trump's America. These days are gone.
Right, so there's no concrete details on his statement to, pressure Russia, so we couldn't be expecting something visible. Now, a high-level U.S. Ukraine meeting is scheduled to take place in Saudi from March 10th to the 12th local time. Now, ahead of the talks, President Trump said that he has almost lifted the suspension on intelligence sharing with Ukraine and expressed optimism for a positive outcome. So with this high-level meeting occurring just 2 weeks after the collapse of the mineral agreement, Professor Che, how would you assess this prospects and what key variables could influence the outcome?
Yes, as you just said, I expect some kind of agreement can be made in Saudi Arabia maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So this upcoming meeting between the two countries, Ukraine and the United States, is really a critical moment. The main question is whether the Ukraine is forced to accept Trump's term, including the minerals agreement, in exchange for some U.S. Intelligence support and possibly military aid. And I think we need to consider some two factors that are likely to affect the outcome. The first factor is the Zelensky, his position is weaker than before. Since the United States stopped military and intelligence support, Ukraine has faced a stronger Russian attack, and also it has faced also more battlefield losses as well. The Ukraine feels it has no choice. It may be pressured into accepting a deal that focuses more on economic cooperation with the United States, but does not include a strong security guarantee. And secondly, the Trump's own priority will largely shape the outcome as well. And he has made it clear that he wants a quick ceasefire, and also he wants to shift to U.S. involvement from military aid to economic deal. And if Ukraine refuses to accept this deal, and Trump may continue to withhold the military support, leaving Ukraine in a difficult position. But however, if Ukraine agrees, it could regain U.S. support, whether it is some intelligence or some kind of military aid, but without strong security guarantee. So I expect some kind of agreement, like a mineral agreement can be made in Saudi Arabia. But unfortunately, this agreement is unlikely to truly help Ukraine security and independence in the long run, because it is unlikely to have strong security guarantee from the United States.
Right, but as of now, it would be definitely a key turning point for U.S.-Ukraine relations, and also the prospects of the war also. Now, President Zelensky has stated he's preparing practical proposal regarding a ceasefire as well. Professor Godong, what exactly does this practical proposal entail, and how will the U.S. receive it, do you think?
Well, the choice of words is very important because here, practical means the opposite of, I don't know, theoretical, the opposite of political, the opposite of philosophical, the opposite of ideal. Practical here means that we will be discussing money. We will be discussing financial assets, and namely, as Professor Che just mentioned, the main question here is how much is Zelensky's Ukraine ready to pay in order to keep receiving some support from America? Intelligence support mostly, because it seems that a more substantial military support is out of the question now. So here, practical means that Zelensky from America is not hoping for any kind of democratic solidarity anymore. What it means is that now we are not discussing in terms of ideals, of, say, typically defending the attacked Ukraine versus the attacker, Russia. It means that here what Zelensky is trying to do is two things. First, is trying to buy some US support for the best price he can get, but also most likely he's trying to buy time because he's expecting some support from Europe in order to be able to continue his war effort against Russia. But this war effort is not there yet because Europe has moved too slowly, and the support Europe has promised is not ready yet, is not available for the time being. So what Zelensky is trying to do is that he's in a very weak position, as Professor Che said, because simply put, without the American support, Russian bombings can only be expected to get worse and worse. So Zelensky is trying to get all the support he gets, all the support he can get from America, to buy time so Europe can step in. Hopefully, I mean, that is in Zelensky's perspective.
Right, so it's a means of trying to buy all kinds of support, whether from the U.S. and from the EU as well. Now, while Ukraine is working to repair its relationship with the U.S., it has been reported that close associates of President Trump have contacted Ukrainian opposition leaders, and there's speculation that pressure to replace President Zelensky may be increasing. Professor Che, what is your view on this?
Yes, I also read a news article that some close associate of Trump administration met with opposition leaders in Ukraine. And this is raising some important question about the U.S. stance on Ukraine's leadership. While the Trump administration says it has no intention to interfere in the domestic politics of Ukraine, but this meeting suggests otherwise. And there are a few key points to consider. The first, the timing is important. This meeting happened soon after Donald Trump called Zelensky a dictator for not holding election during the war. And his national security advisor also said a leader who refuses to negotiate cannot end the war, suggesting that a leadership change might be necessary. So this makes it seem like the United States is at least considering some kind of alternatives to Mr. Zelensky. But however, Ukraine is now under martial law and delaying presidential election. And some opposition leaders are requesting early votes. But however, opinion polls show that the Zelensky is still the most popular politician in Ukraine, with a strong lead over his challenger. So even if there is an election in the near future, it is unlikely that opposition leaders actually win the election. So based on this consideration, it seems to me that this meeting with opposition leaders is simply a diplomatic pressure on President Zelensky. if the United States is using this as a diplomatic pressure, it could be a way to push Ukraine into some economic deal, such as a mineral deal and also a quick ceasefire. So, so I think it is unlikely to forcefully replace Ukrainian leadership. So, but anyway, this kind of news adding another complexity to another complicated situation in Ukraine.
Right. It's also it's basically a means of pressuring Ukraine from the Trump's side. Now, let's move on to another topic. So, meanwhile, at the EU Special Summit held on March 6th, EU leaders, excluding that of Hungary, agreed to specifically expand support for Ukraine. Professor Godon, can this increase in European support strengthen Ukraine's position in negotiations with America?
Well, at least that's a plan. That's the intention. That's the intention of Zelensky, who applied for Ukraine to become a part of the EU. But that's also the intention of European leaders. And all over Europe, save Hungary and Slovakia, but amongst all major EU powers and also the UK, there is a consensus to increase military spending to go support Ukraine. And the effort we are discussing now is massive. For instance, right now, France is having the largest army in the EU. France is devoting about 2% of its GDP to military expenditures. The plan is to increase it to 5%, which is huge. The same goes for Germany. We do not have an actual number yet because a new government, we have a new chancellor, but we don't even have a new government in Germany yet. But we know that the German war effort is to double at least. So if, of course, Europe were to increase its military industry in these proportions, that could mean a significant support to Ukraine. Three issues, however. First, obviously, the money. The bottom line is always money, because the European economy, as everywhere else, is in a very bad shape. So where are you to find the money in order to finance this war effort, as European countries are heavily indebted, for most of them, not Germany, but Italy, France, etc. are. Second, the second issue is the decision process, because in the EU, as you know, it is extremely slow, extremely complex, extremely convoluted. So will European states manage to come to an agreement, to a number, and to a plan fast enough? Because third issue is that Europe needs time, and the one thing Ukraine doesn't have for now, it is time. Europe would have the capacity to support Ukraine in the long run. The issue is that this move is coming very late. And personally, I think that this is happening so late because Europeans refused to believe what Trump was arguing all along his campaign. They refused to believe that America will change so fast to switch alliances and to turn to Russia, North Korea, etc., in the UN. And now Europe probably is paying the price of its own illusions. So long story short, yes, it will be possible, but it will take time, and we don't have time. That's the situation now.
Right. Time is key at this point, especially in the part of Ukraine. So we'll have to see on that. Now, Russian state media has said that there may be a second round of U.S. Russia talks, meanwhile, in Türkiye to discuss the end of the war in Ukraine. So if the second round of negotiations take place, what would be the main agenda, Professor Che?
The main topics in the second round of talk will likely be a ceasefire, and also territorial division and economic cooperation, and possibly sanctions relief for Russia. So first of all, a ceasefire will likely be a top priority. The United States and Russia may try to agree on stopping the fight, but the big question is whether Ukraine will be forced to accept a deal that does not fully protect its independence and sovereignty. But if Trump administration really wants a quick agreement, the ceasefire could be made at the expense of Ukraine. And secondly, the territorial division will be another major issue during this talk. Russia has taken more land during the war and may demand official recognition of their occupied territory. If the United States is more focused on making a deal rather than reversing Russian gains, I'm really afraid to say that the Ukraine could lose their key regions somewhat permanently. And third, economic cooperation and sanctions relief may be on the table as well. The report suggests that Russia is looking for American investment, and Russia also wants to restart energy trade with Europe, such as the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline that connects Russia to Germany. And for this to happen, the United States would have to lift sanctions on Russia. So in general, this kind of a talk could be a turning point in the war, but the key question is whether they will lead to a fair and lasting peace, or simply a quick political deal that mostly benefit great powers at the expense of Ukraine.
Right, so we'll have to wait and see until the results would come out. Now, meanwhile, as of South Korea, the U.S. Russia ties tighten with economic interests at the forefront. The international diplomatic landscape is being shaken. So, what do you think there's a need for South Korea? What are the ways to improve the unstable South Korea-Russia relations? Professor Gudong.
In fact, when it comes to its relation to Russia, Korea has relatively little autonomy. Because from the Russian point of view, what is South Korea? South Korea is one of America's main allies in the region. So what it means is that if, for good or bad reasons, relations are to improve between America and Russia, probably it means less pressure from Russia on Korea. So overall, from a more selfish point of view, that's good news. It means probably that, for instance, if economic sanctions are to be lifted, and they probably will be if the war is to end anytime soon, that's good for the Korean economy, and relations are to improve, so to speak, naturally. There isn't much to be done, in my perspective here. My recommendation would be more to be considered in the long term, because we know that Vladimir Putin's regime only serves his own interests. And for instance, in Europe, Angela Merkel, the former German chancellor, had chosen to trust Putin's words, and so it made Germany very dependent on Russian gas. And look at the catastrophes that followed for the German economy. So my point here is relatively simple. If relations improve between Russia and America, it's good for Korea. However, the long-term question is about knowing whether Russia is reliable. Can Russia be trusted as a partner? It's more of a strategic choice to be made for Korea. Korea is surrounded with, how should I put it, dangerous neighbors, simply put. And so for Korea, it's always a tough choice to make in order to go for the lesser of two evils. Korea used to rely on the US. If the US is not to be trusted as much as it used to in the past, then the question is, what do we do? But Russia will be probably a very dangerous alliance to go for, probably.
Right. So South Korea really faces a critical decision balancing diplomacy and security, especially with Russia tightening ties with North Korea as well.
Yes, on top of it.
So we'll have to keep close watch on the situation, but we'll have to leave our discussion right here. But thank you so much for your insights, Professor Che and Professor Godang tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you
very much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.